The Valex Empire had torn through 17 star systems in as many days. Their black dreadnoughts moved like death itself across the void, leaving nothing but silence and ash in their wake. Each ship stretched over 2 kilometers long, their hulls decorated with the bones of fallen civilizations. The Empire's motto was carved into every vessel: "Surrender brings mercy. Resistance brings extinction." Commander Ji-won stood on the bridge of the human cruiser, Iron Phoenix, his hands gripping the railing as he watched the tactical display with growing horror. The holographic screen showed a beautiful blue-green world spinning peacefully in space. Haven Colony, home to 40,000 farmers, teachers, children, and elderly settlers who had built their lives growing food for the Outer Rim colonies. The agricultural world glowed peacefully on the screen, its twin suns casting golden light across vast wheat fields and crystal-clear lakes. Small cities dotted the continents like jewels, connected by silver transport tubes that carried harvested crops to the orbital stations. Children were probably playing in those cities right now. Families were sitting down for dinner, completely unaware that 3 million tons of alien warships were bearing down on them with enough firepower to crack planets in half. "Sir, we're receiving the evacuation order," reported Lieutenant Minji from the communications station. Her young face was pale as she read the incoming message. "Fleet Command wants us to extract as many civilians as possible before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ji-won turned from the view screen, his weathered face showing every one of his 43 years. He had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 2 decades, fighting pirates and smugglers in the outer systems, but this was different. This was facing an enemy that had never lost a battle, never shown mercy, never left survivors to tell the tale. "How many?" His voice was steady, but his crew could see the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. Minji's fingers trembled as she checked her console again, hoping the numbers had somehow changed. 40,000 colonists, sir. Our transport capacity is still 1,200 maximum per trip." The bridge fell deadly silent. Everyone did the math in their heads. Even if they could make 30 trips without stopping, without refueling, without the Valex fleet arriving, they could only save 36,000 people. That left 4,000 souls with no escape route. Navigation Officer Sunho broke the quiet, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Valex fleet will arrive in 6 hours, sir. Even with multiple trips, we can't save them all." He paused, staring at his instruments. Intelligence reports show 12 dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough plasma torpedoes to glass an entire continent. Through the main view screen, Haven Colony's green continent sparkled in the light of twin suns. Ji-won could see the massive agricultural zones from orbit, endless fields of golden grain swaying in alien winds. Somewhere down there, a little girl was probably feeding chickens in her backyard. A grandfather was teaching his grandson how to repair farming equipment. Teenagers were falling in love under those twin suns. Ji-won had seen the aftermath of Valex attacks during his intelligence briefings. Worlds reduced to molten slag, their surfaces turned to glass that reflected nothing but the cold light of distant stars. Entire species erased from existence, their languages, their art, their dreams, all turned to cosmic dust. The Valex didn't just kill, they eliminated. They removed every trace that a civilization had ever existed. No force had ever stopped them. The Kepler Defense Fleet, 300 ships strong, had lasted exactly 47 minutes against a single Valex battle group. The Titan fortress, built into an asteroid and armed with weapons that could shatter moons, had been reduced to glowing debris in less than an hour. No world had ever survived their attention once the black ships appeared in their skies. "Sir?" Minji's voice was barely a whisper, her hands shaking as she waited for orders that might doom thousands of innocent people. "What are your orders?" The bridge crew turned to look at their commander. Chief Engineer Ki-won stood near the engine status display, his grease-stained hands clenched into fists. Weapons Officer Hyun sat frozen at his console, knowing that all, their missiles and railguns combined, couldn't even scratch the paint on a Valex escort ship. Pilot Youngji gripped her control stick, ready to run the fastest evacuation mission in human history. Ji-won looked at each of his crew members, 38, souls who had volunteered to serve on the frontier, protecting colonies that most people back on Earth had never heard of. They were mechanics and farmers' sons, college dropouts and military academy graduates, united by a simple belief that every human life mattered. The tactical display updated with new information. Long-range sensors showed the Valix fleet moving. Through hyperspace like a school of mechanical sharks, their destination locked onto Haven Colony's coordinates. In 6 hours, those black dreadnoughts would emerge from the void and begin their terrible work. "We hold the line," Jiwon announced, his voice cutting through the bridge's stunned silence like a blade through steel. The words hung in the air for a moment. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The idea was so insane, so impossible, that it took several seconds for anyone to process what their captain had just said. "Sir," Tactical Officer Hyun looked up from his console, his young face twisted in confusion. "Our orders are to evacuate—" "Our orders are to protect human lives," Jiwon corrected, turning to face his crew with eyes that burned like twin stars. "All of them. Every single colonist down there matters. Every child, every parent, every grandmother baking bread in her kitchen. We don't abandon people just because the math doesn't work out." The Iron Phoenix was a Titan-class heavy cruiser, built for exploration and patrol duty in the quiet Outer Rim systems. She was designed to chase down smugglers, escort merchant convoys, and show the flag in remote colonies. Her armor was thick enough to stop pirate lasers. Her weapons could punch holes through asteroid mining ships. But against the Valix Armada, she was nothing more than a rowboat facing a tsunami of death and destruction. Hyun stared at his weapons display, his hands trembling slightly. "Captain, our heaviest missiles can barely scratch their escort ships. Their smallest dreadnought has more firepower than our entire battle group back at headquarters." "I know the odds," Jiwon said quietly. "But sometimes doing the right thing isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about giving people hope. Sometimes it's about buying time for miracles to happen." He walked to the center of the bridge, looking at each crew member in turn. These weren't professional soldiers. They were volunteers, most of them barely out of their 20s, who had signed up to protect colonists and explore new worlds. None of them had ever expected to face an enemy that could wipe out entire civilizations. "Daejung, plot an intercept course," Jiwon commanded, his voice steady as granite. "Put us between Haven Colony and the enemy fleet. Make sure they have to go through us to reach those people." Navigator Daejung's fingers flew over his controls, plotting a course that would place their single ship directly in the path of 12 alien dreadnoughts. "Course laid in, sir. We'll be in position in 43 minutes. Yoonji, start broadcasting evacuation corridors to the surface," Jiwon continued. "Anyone who can reach the shuttles gets off-world. Coordinate with the colony. Administrators, I want those transport ships moving like their lives depend on it, because they do." Communications Officer Yoonji opened channels to Haven Colony's emergency network. Her voice was calm and professional as she began organizing the largest evacuation in colonial history. "Haven Colony Control, this is CNS Iron Phoenix. We are implementing Emergency Protocol 7. All civilians to designated pickup zones immediately." Down on the planet's surface, air raid sirens began wailing across peaceful farming communities. Families grabbed whatever they could carry and ran for the transport hubs, not fully understanding what was coming but trusting the human warship orbiting overhead to protect them. "Captain," Chief Engineer Kaiwon's voice crackled over the comm system from deep in the ship's engine room. "I've been running diagnostics on our power systems. Our reactor can't sustain a prolonged engagement with that kind of firepower. We have maybe 30 minutes of full combat power before we start losing systems." Jiwon nodded grimly. "Then we make those 30 minutes count, Kiwon. Give me everything you've got. Reroute power from life support if you have to. Strip energy. From the recreational areas, the hydroponics bays, anything that isn't weapons or shields." Throughout the ship, lights dimmed as power flowed to the weapon systems. The Iron Phoenix might be outgunned, but she would go down fighting with every joule of energy her crew could squeeze from her systems. 5 hours later, space itself seemed to tear open like a wound. The Valix fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their black hulls absorbing light and hope in equal measure. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one stretching over 2 kilometers from bow to stern, each one capable of turning continents into glass. At their head flew the command ship Dominion of Scales, its crimson hull scarred by weapons fire from 1,000 conquered worlds. The ship was a monument to destruction, decorated with trophy armor plating from defeated enemies and powered by the screams of dead civilizations. Admiral Vorthak of the Valek stood on his command bridge, a towering figure with 4 glowing red eyes and skin like polished obsidian. His species had evolved on a world of eternal war, and conquest was literally in their DNA. He gazed at his tactical display with cold satisfaction, already composing the report he would send back to the Empire about another successful cleansing operation, another primitive world, another easy victory. The humans were barely capable of interstellar travel, their technology centuries behind Valek's standard. This would be over in minutes. Then his sensor operator hissed in confusion, a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "Admiral, there's a single enemy vessel positioned between us and the planet." Vorthak's 4 eyes narrowed, focusing on the tactical display with predatory intensity. "One ship?" "Yes, Admiral. Human-designed Titan-class heavy cruiser. Mass approximately 800,000 tons. They're not retreating, sir." For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Vorthak encountered something that defied all logic and experience. In 3 decades of conquest, no species had ever willingly faced the Valek's fleet in open combat. The smart ones surrendered immediately and were granted quick deaths. The stupid ones tried to run and were hunted down like animals. But this was something new, something unprecedented. Surrender or extinction. Those were the only options the Valek's empire offered to lesser species. There was no third choice, no middle ground, no negotiation. Yet here was a single human warship, impossibly tiny compared to his battle fleet, positioning itself directly in his path like a guard dog protecting its master's house. "Curious," he mused, his voice carrying the sound of grinding metal. "They must be malfunctioning. Perhaps their engines are damaged." His tactical officer checked the sensors again. "No, sir. They're moving under full power. All systems appear operational. They're deliberately blocking our approach to the planet." Vorthak stared at the display for a long moment, trying to understand the alien psychology behind such a suicidal gesture. Then he dismissed it with a wave of his clawed hand. "Destroy it." The first Valek's missile salvo lit up space like a deadly constellation of burning stars. 16 heavy plasma torpedoes streaked across the void, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city block. Their blue-white trails painted death across the darkness as they homed in on the tiny human cruiser. The Iron Phoenix rolled hard to starboard, her pilot Youngji's hands dancing across the controls with the grace of a concert pianist. The ship twisted and spun through 3 dimensions, her hull groaning under the stress as she pulled maneuvers that would have torn apart a lesser vessel. Youngji had grown up racing atmospheric fighters through the canyon systems of New Sol, and those skills were the only thing keeping them alive right now. "Missile impact in 30 seconds, Hyun shouted over the screaming alarm klaxons, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "I'm reading 16 heavy plasma torpedoes, plus point defense lasers trying to get a lock on us." The bridge lights flickered red as the ship's computer calculated impact probabilities. Numbers scrolled across Hyun's tactical display: 78% chance of catastrophic hull breach, 92% chance of reactor containment failure, 99.7% chance of total crew loss. The math was crystal clear. They were about to die. "Minji, launch chaff and activate the ECM suite," Ji-won ordered with supernatural calm, his voice cutting through the panic like a steady lighthouse beam in a storm. "Ki-won, emergency power to forward shields. Everything we've got." Communications officer Minji's fingers flew over her console, launching clouds of metallic debris and electronic decoys into space. The chaff spread out like a silver cloud, confusing the incoming missiles' targeting systems. Meanwhile, the ship's electronic countermeasures suite began broadcasting false sensor readings, making it look like the Iron Phoenix was in 12 different places at once. Deep in the engine room, Chief Engineer Ki-won rerouted power from every non-essential system on the ship. The crew quarters went dark. The mess hall lost power. Even the emergency lighting dimmed, as every available joule of energy flowed to the forward shield generators. The cruiser shuddered violently as several plasma torpedoes found their mark, the impacts feeling like giant hammers slamming into the hull. The forward shields flared brilliant white as they absorbed the attack, their energy levels dropping from 100% to 34% in less than 3 seconds. But they held, barely. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles as the ship's systems struggled to cope with the punishment. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone's stomach lurch. But they were still alive, still fighting. "Sir, we can't trade shots with them," Youngji called from the helm, her voice tight with concentration as she kept the ship dancing through the incoming fire. "Their smallest escort ship outguns us 3-1. Their dreadnoughts have enough. Firepower to crack moons in half." Ji-won studied the tactical display with the intensity of a chess master facing his final move. The Valak's fleet was advancing in perfect formation, a textbook attack pattern that had crushed every enemy they'd ever faced. Their dreadnoughts formed the center, with smaller escorts protecting their flanks. They expected their enemy to either flee in terror or charge straight into their overwhelming firepower. Both options led to the same result: total annihilation. "Then we don't play by their rules," Ji-won said, a dangerous smile crossing his weathered face. "Youngji, do we still have those mining charges from the Kepler station operation?" Communications Officer Youngji checked her cargo manifest, her eyes widening as she realized what the captain was planning. "Yes, sir. 200 fusion charges in Cargo Bay 3. They're designed for asteroid mining, but an explosion is an explosion," Ji-won finished. "Have them prepped for launch. Arm the magnetic clamps and set them for remote detonation." "Sir," Navigator Daejung interrupted, "those charges aren't military weapons. They don't have guidance systems or armor-piercing capabilities." "They don't need them," Ji-won replied. "Youngji, take us into Haven's asteroid belt. Full burn. Make it look like we're running scared." The Iron Phoenix suddenly changed course, diving toward the rocky debris field that orbited Haven Colony like a protective ring. The asteroid belt contained thousands of chunks of rock and ice, some as small as cars, others as large as office buildings. It was a navigation hazard that most ships avoided, but right now it was their only hope. Behind them, the Valak's fleet followed in pursuit, their massive engines burning like blue stars as they accelerated after the fleeing human ship. Admiral Vorthak watched the chase on his tactical display, his 4 eyes glowing with predatory satisfaction. "Admiral," his sensor operator reported, "the human ship has entered the asteroid field. Should we follow?" Vorthak's mandibles clicked, in dark amusement, the sound like breaking glass. "They think rocks will save them, how pathetic. These primitive mammals believe they can hide from the might of the Valak's empire." He gestured to his fleet commander with one clawed hand. "Maintain pursuit. Crush them along with their hiding place. Show them that there is nowhere in this galaxy they can run from us." The 12 dreadnoughts plunged into the asteroid field, their massive hulls easily shouldering aside the smaller rocks. Their sensors locked onto the Iron Phoenix as she wove between the larger asteroids, apparently desperate to find shelter. But as the Valak's formation spread out to surround their prey, something completely unexpected happened. The human ship didn't cower behind the asteroids. It attacked. Fusion charges that had been disguised as drifting chunks of rock suddenly activated throughout the Valak's formation. The mining explosives, designed to crack apart asteroids, detonated in brilliant flashes of nuclear fire. The smaller escort ships, caught completely off guard, suffered massive hull breaches and catastrophic system failures as the explosions tore through their formations. More importantly, their perfect military formation dissolved into chaos as ships scattered to avoid the unexpected blasts. "Now," Ji-won commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had just pulled off the impossible. The Iron Phoenix burst from behind a massive spinning asteroid like a predator emerging from ambush, all weapons blazing with desperate fury. Her twin railguns hammered the damaged escort ships with streams of hypervelocity projectiles, punching holes through armor that had never been breached before. Her missile batteries locked onto the command ship's sensor arrays, sending salvos of warheads streaking toward the most heavily defended target in the fleet. "Impossible!" Admiral Vorthak snarled as his command bridge flickered under emergency lighting, sparks cascading from overloaded systems. How did they penetrate our formation? How did they get weapons into position without our sensors detecting them? His question was answered by another wave of concealed explosives detonating around the fleet. More escort ships suffered critical damage as fusion charges that had been floating disguised as space debris revealed their true nature. The humans hadn't just hidden in the asteroid field, they had turned the entire debris field into the galaxy's largest minefield. For the first time in his career, Admiral Vorthak realized he was facing an enemy that thought completely differently than any species the Valeks had ever encountered. These humans didn't fight like civilized beings. They fought like cornered animals, unpredictable, desperate, and utterly without honor. And somehow it was working. For 27 minutes, the Iron Phoenix danced through the asteroid field like a ghost ship from ancient legends, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Valeks could respond. She would appear from behind a spinning chunk of rock, unleash a devastating barrage of railgun fire, then disappear into the maze of debris before the enemy could lock onto her position. 3 escort ships now drifted powerless through space, their hulls torn open by precision strikes that had targeted their weapon systems and engines. Atmosphere leaked from their wounds like blood from dying animals, freezing instantly in the vacuum of space. The Valeks crews inside those ships were learning what fear felt like for the first time in their lives, but the human ship was dying. 2. Hull breach on deck 7 through 9, Chief Engineer Kiwan reported over the comm system, his voice tight with pain and barely controlled panic. Forward shields are completely gone, and I'm reading plasma fires spreading through the engine room. We've lost main power to the port weapons array. Sparks cascaded from damaged consoles across the bridge as the Iron Phoenix shuddered under another devastating impact. The lights flickered between normal illumination and emergency red, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the crew. The air itself tasted of smoke and ozone from overloaded electrical systems. "Casualty report?" Captain Jiwon asked, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Communications Officer Minji's hands shook as she read from her medical scanner display. 14 dead, 36 wounded, she whispered, tears streaming down her young face. The medical bay is overwhelmed. Dr. Hyunwoo is performing surgery in the corridor because we don't have enough beds. She looked up at her captain with desperate eyes. "Sir, maybe we should consider no retreat," Jiwon cut her off with absolute finality. "Those people down there are counting on us. How many civilians made it to the shuttles?" Minji checked her communications board, watching the streams of evacuation data flowing up from Haven Colony's surface. 8,000 so far, sir. The transport ships are working around the clock, but we're running out of time. The colonists in the outer settlements can't reach the pickup zones fast enough. The Iron Phoenix shuddered violently as another Valeks plasma torpedo found its mark, the explosion sending shock waves through the ship's superstructure. Her port engine died in a cascade of brilliant sparks and venting plasma, and the artificial gravity flickered throughout the ship, making everyone's stomach lurch as they briefly floated free. Navigator Daijung gripped his console with white knuckles. "We're down to 60% thrust, Captain. Maneuvering thrusters are responding sluggishly. We can't keep dancing around these asteroids much longer." Tactical Officer Hyun's board was a Christmas tree of red warning lights. "Sir, we've exhausted our missile reserves. Railgun ammunition is down to 12%. Even our point defense lasers are running low on capacitor charge. But still they fought on, this battered human ship and her brave crew buying precious minutes for the innocent people below." On the Valeks command ship Dominion of Scales, Admiral Phi, Vorthak stood frozen at his tactical display, staring at the impossible scene unfolding before his 4 eyes. His bridge crew watched him nervously, unused to seeing their supreme commander show any emotion other than cold confidence. One human cruiser had held his entire battle fleet for nearly half an hour. His escort ships were crippled, floating wrecks that would need months in dry dock to repair. His perfect formation was broken, scattered across the asteroid field like leaves in a storm. And worst of all, something he had never experienced in 30 years of conquest was growing in his chest like a cancer. Doubt. "Sir," his communications officer hissed, the sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "We're receiving transmissions from across the sector. Long-range sensors show that other species are Watching this battle, the words hit Vorthak like a physical blow. His blood ran cold in his veins as the implications sank in. The Valex Empire's absolute power rested on a simple, unshakable truth that had never been challenged. Resistance was futile. Every species in the galaxy knew that fighting the Valex meant certain death, not just for the defenders, but for their entire civilization. But if one human ship could stand against the might of the Empire, if others across the galaxy saw that the Valex could be bloodied and confused and held at bay, then everything would change. The foundation of fear that held the Empire together would crack. Rebellions would spark on 1,000 worlds. Admiral, his sensor operator, added, "The Kepler Defense Network is broadcasting this engagement across subspace. Every colony in human space is watching, and sir, I'm detecting unauthorized transmissions from some of our own subject worlds." Vorthak's 4 eyes burned like red coals as rage replaced his doubt. This single human ship wasn't just defying him, it was threatening the entire structure of Valex dominance. Every second this battle continued, every moment that tiny cruiser remained active, the legend would grow. "All ships," he snarled into his communicator, his voice carrying the fury of a dying god. "Focus all fire on the human vessel. Forget the escorts, ignore the asteroids. I want every weapon in the fleet aimed at that ship. End this now before it spreads like a virus across the galaxy." The remaining 9 Valex dreadnoughts turned their full fury on the Iron Phoenix, their massive weapon arrays swiveling to track the battered human cruiser. Hundreds of plasma cannons, missile tubes, and particle beam projectors locked onto their target with mechanical precision. The human ship, bleeding atmosphere and trailing debris, now faced the concentrated firepower of 12 capital ships with no hope of survival. On the bridge of the Iron Phoenix, the crew felt the targeting. Sensors lock onto them like the gaze of death itself. Warning alarms screamed as the ship's computer calculated the incoming destruction. More firepower than had ever been directed at a single target in the history of warfare. "Captain," Pilot Youngji said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears running down her cheeks, "it's been an honor serving with you." Captain G1 looked around his bridge one last time, taking in the faces of his crew. These brave souls, bloodied but unbowed, were still at their posts despite knowing they faced certain death. Hyun kept his weapons trained on enemy targets, even though his ammunition was nearly gone. Minji maintained communications with the evacuation fleet, even as plasma fire erupted around them. Daijun plotted their final course with steady hands. "No," Ji-won said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "The honor has been mine." The Iron Phoenix turned toward the massed Valex fleet, her damaged engines roaring to life one final time. With her remaining weapons blazing defiance across the void, the little human cruiser charged straight into the teeth of the enemy formation, her crew singing an old Earth song about sailors who never came home. Behind them, 32,000. People lifted off from Haven Colony's surface, carried to safety by the time their protectors had bought with their lives. The explosion of the Iron Phoenix lit Haven Colony's sky like a second sun, a brilliant flash of white-hot plasma that could be seen from 3 planets away. The brave little cruiser died as she had lived, fighting to the very end, her reactor core going critical as she rammed straight into the heart of the Valex formation. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, space fell completely silent. No weapons fired, no engines roared. Even the cosmic background radiation seemed to pause in respect for the sacrifice that had just taken place. Debris from the human ship scattered across the asteroid field like silver tears, each piece carrying the dreams and hopes of 38 souls who had chosen duty over survival. Admiral Vorthak stood on his damaged bridge, staring at the tactical display where the Iron Phoenix had been just seconds before. There was nothing left now but an expanding cloud of superheated gas and twisted metal. His 4 red eyes should have been glowing with triumph. His mandibles should have been clicking with satisfaction. Instead, he felt something he'd never experienced before in 30 years of conquest: uncertainty. "Admiral," his sensor operator whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of emergency power systems. "The planet's population centers are empty. They evacuated almost everyone while we were engaged with the human ship." The words hit Vorthak like a physical blow. How many escaped? His communications officer checked the long-range sensors, scanning the evacuation routes that stretched away from Haven Colony toward the outer rim. 37,000 civilians, sir. The transport ships launched continuously during our battle, while we were fighting that single cruiser. Vorthak stared at the tactical display, his ancient mind struggling to process what had just happened. One human ship, impossibly outgunned and outnumbered, had saved an entire world by sacrificing itself. The crew of the Iron Phoenix had known. They were going to die from the moment they chose to stand and fight. But they had done it anyway, buying precious time with their lives. More troubling, his own mighty fleet was crippled. 3 escort ships destroyed completely, their hulls cracked open like eggs. 2 more heavily damaged and limping on emergency power. His flagship's sensor arrays were offline, blinded by the human ship's final desperate attack. The fleet that had conquered 17 star systems in 17 days had been bloodied by a single enemy vessel. "Sir," his communications officer reported, his voice trembling with something that might have been fear. "Incoming transmissions from the Helix sector. Multiple channels, all broadcasting the same message." "Put it through," Vorthak growled. 20. Voice that filled the bridge belonged to Chancellor Vexitari of the Zelani Confederacy, a species that had been under Valek's rule for over 2 decades. But now her words carried something that hadn't been heard in Valek space for generations: defiance. To all free beings across the galaxy, the Chancellor's voice rang out clear and strong. The Zelani Confederacy declares independence from the Valek's Empire. We have seen the proof that these tyrants can be resisted. The human ship at Haven Colony showed us that courage can triumph over overwhelming odds. The Haven defense will be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned to fight back. Vorthak's bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Rebellion was spreading like wildfire across subspace communications, and it was all because of one human captain who had refused to run away. "And sir," another officer added, his voice cracking with panic, "long-range sensors are detecting massive human fleet movements. Multiple task forces converging on this position from at least 12 different systems. They're coming to investigate what happened here." For the first time in Valek's military history, an Imperial admiral found himself facing a choice that no commander before him had ever contemplated. His fleet was damaged. His reputation was in ruins. Enemy reinforcements were approaching, and, worst of all, the foundation of fear that held the Empire together was cracking like thin ice. "All ships," Admiral Vorthak gave an order that would echo through history books for centuries to come, "withdraw from this system. Full retreat." As the battered Valek's fleet limped away from Haven Colony, their black hulls trailing plasma and debris, subspace communications across the galaxy carried a single, transformative message that would change everything. The Empire could bleed. On distant worlds where alien bootheels had crushed hope for generations, enslaved species looked up at their overlords with new eyes. In hidden bases scattered across forgotten moons, resistance cells that had survived on nothing but hope began planning their first real strikes against Imperial targets. The human ship was gone, turned to cosmic dust, but its sacrifice had lit a fire across the stars that would burn until the last Valek stronghold fell. 3 months later, Captain Jiwon's younger brother Taehyun stood on the bridge of the massive Dreadnought Phoenix Rising, his admiral's uniform crisp and new. Around him, the first joint human-alien fleet in galactic history prepared for battle. Ships from a dozen different species flew in formation: sleek Zelani cruisers, massive Kepler battleships, even converted civilian vessels crewed by volunteers who had never fired a shot in anger. The Valek's empire, built on the seemingly unshakable foundation of inevitable victory, crumbled as world after world rose in rebellion. Species that had been enslaved for centuries discovered that their chains were made of fear, not steel, and fear could be broken by a single act of courage. The legend of the Iron Phoenix spread through 1,000 cultures, told in 1,000 different languages, but always carrying the same simple message. Sometimes one ship standing in the way is enough to change everything. Children on distant worlds learned the names of Captain G1 and his brave crew. Poets wrote songs about the human ship that chose to fight impossible odds. Military academies across the galaxy studied the Battle of Haven Colony, trying to understand how 38 people had defeated an empire without firing a single shot at its capital. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology. They possessed neither. Instead, they had won by teaching other species the most dangerous lesson of all, that even the mightiest empire could fall to those brave enough to look tyranny in the eye and say no. The Iron Phoenix was gone, but her legacy burned eternal in the hearts of free beings across the stars, and in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. The end.